Just look at it. Isn't that, I mean, in some ways this is very simple. In some ways it's a little bit challenging because it means we have to turn away from the other view of ourselves. Look and keep on looking, created in righteousness and true holiness. That's pretty good, isn't it? Here's another one. This is the last one. I think I'll stop after this. Turn over to chapter 5. Same book, Ephesians chapter 5. Here now, Paul, what he's meaning to do here is to speak practically to different relationships that we have and tell us how to walk in the light of who we are in Christ in terms of our different relationships. And Paul is so interesting. He's talking about all these different things, but he always slips back into the gospel. He loves to tell us about Christ. And so here he's talking to husbands, and he's telling husbands in verse 5:25, telling husbands to love their wives, but it's like he can't quit talking about Jesus. That's what I like about Paul. He's kind of just hung up on and obsessed with Christ. So he starts talking to husbands, but he ends up talking about Christ. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church. Who's the church? Us, that's right. He's not talking about this building. I'm sure he loves the building too, but he's talking specifically about you and me, right? He's talking to you now, right? Okay. Christ loved the church. You should write your name there. Christ loves me. And He gave Himself for it, the church. He gave Himself for me. That is on the cross. It says, Christ loves me. He gave Himself for me. Verse 26. Here's the result of Him giving Himself on the cross for me. That He might sanctify. Sanctify means to make holy. It comes from the identical word that's translated holy that we read in the previous chapter. He gave Himself on the cross to make me holy. See, why is Paul writing this? He wants us to see ourselves that way. I am holy because He made me holy. He gave Himself that He might sanctify and cleanse it, the church, or me. I'm clean. Not because I did anything to get clean. Not because I'm perfect on the outside, but on the inside He made me clean because He gave Him. His blood was powerful enough to sanctify and make me clean. By the washing of water, listen to this, by the washing of water by the Word. Oh, I thought we were talking about Christ giving Himself for it. Yes, but it's the Word that tells us about it. It's the Word that shows the mirror to us and shows us. Haven't we been reading that? Look into the perfect law of liberty. Jesus said, continue in my Word. Paul here says, the reality of this takes effect, and it shows you as you're looking at the washing of water by the Word, which tells us about what He did for us, and the result, verse 27. All still, see the word that did you notice verse 26 and 27 begin with the word that. The word that means, by Him giving Himself for us, this is the result of it. He gave Himself so that He might present it, the church, to Himself, a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that it should be holy and without blemish. I've heard preachers take this verse 27 and use it as a club to beat people with. You scoundrels, you carnal bunch of backslidden buzzards. He wants a glorious church without spot or wrinkle. Be like me taking that apple tree when I didn't see any fruit and jerk it up out of the ground. And you rotten thing, He wants a glorious tree with apples all over it. You know what it would do if I jerked it out of the ground and uprooted it? It would never produce fruit. What if I did that once a week? And then on Sunday morning, jerk it up out of the ground. It would never grow, right? That's why a lot of Christians never grow. See, that's not what he said to look at, is it? Is it? That kind of message. Listen to what it says here. This is so different from what most people think he's saying. He's saying back up in verse 25, he said He gave Himself for it. And then in verse 27, this is the real, so that He might present it to Himself. He's the only one acting here. That He might present it to Himself a glorious church. The church, and by extension you and me, are glorious, have glory, not because we did anything, but because of what He did in us. Not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing. Well now, where did the spots, the wrinkles, and any such thing go? Well, when He gave Himself on the cross, His blood cleansed those spots and wrinkles and any such thing. What does He want us to do about that? Look at it and believe it's true. I heard one person say about this very verse here, reading it and getting a glimpse of this truth, and saying, just kind of saying to the Lord, you say I don't have any spots or wrinkles or any such thing. I don't believe it. And this person said, the Lord said, I know you don't believe it. That's why you act the way you do. Because you don't believe it. We're supposed to believe it, you see. Is that okay? Yeah. again, notice what he said, that he might present it to himself. The only person acting here is him that I can see. How? A glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that it should be holy and without blemish. All I can see is this, is that that's how he sees us by virtue of him giving himself for us. Because he shed his blood for us, it so cleansed us. See, he sees us that way. It's us that don't see us that way. But what would happen if we looked in the mirror and saw that? What would happen? I guarantee you it would revolutionize the way we think and the way we act then after that. Remember, that's the goal. Now, I want to read something to you. This is from a book called Reigning with Christ. You know which book I'm talking about, don't you? By F.J. Hugel. I found this quote and I thought it was so good, and it pertains to what we're talking about. And I've read this before. You might have heard this before. But I thought it was so good talking about this reality of this relationship that we have with Christ and what really is now true about us. Let me read this to you. I like this very, very much. He says, because of Christ within, all is now in order. Instead of an earthly order, it is a celestial order, and the love of Christ constrains us. Where once pride ruled with an iron hand, now humility, the humility of Jesus, prevails. Where once lust for pleasure was an overmastering passion, now the desire to serve and help others surges with overwhelming force. Where once vainglory with a secret eye to one's own self-aggrandizement in everything reigned, now there is a willingness to be nothing if only God may be glorified. Where once there was offense at every turn of the road and wounded pride ever lusting for vindication, now the sweet forgiveness of Jesus steps in to glorify what would have otherwise been unbearable. Where once there was a fever of haste and rush, now the peace of God's time and place and order brings down days of heaven upon the earth. Now, in that very beautiful quote, what was he really doing? He was contrasting two ways of thinking. One is a carnal way, looking at natural life. The other was replacing it with God's mirror, with God's way of looking at it, God's order in our lives. And he was saying, where once it was like this, God says it's like this. Now, what are we supposed to do about that? Well, again, we're supposed to look at it. You know, what I noticed in these verses we read today, all he seems to be saying is look at it, just look at it, and keep on looking at it. And he said, if you look at it and keep on looking at it, you'll be transformed into that same image. Because the reality is we're just like that apple tree I told you. We've got that life on the inside of us. And if we'll water it and nurture it, it'll grow and just produce fruit all by itself. Let's all stand up today.
Jesus!